All right, we are blasting through conference media days this first week of two here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We ask that you subscribe, like, and comment. That keeps us going and provides some more content for you. You can also check out the audio at Google Play, iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher. We're talking up the OU Sooners with Seth Oliveris from Crimson and Cream Machine. Seth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I had a pretty good time in Frisco on Monday. That's when OU was scheduled to be in Big 12 Media Day. So just really waiting to get the season started.
Yeah, so was that your first trip to media days?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a blast. The site manager, Jack Shields for Crimson and Cream Machine, he just sent me a message one day. Said, "Hey, would you be interested in joining me down in Frisco?" And I was like, "Yeah, heck yeah!" You know, because I've been a college football junkie, and not just with Oklahoma sports, but just all Oklahoma football, but throughout college football. Like I'm always watching games. So big media days has always been a big deal to me. Even though there's not necessarily a ton of exciting things that happen, at least compared to college football Saturdays, but I got a kick out of it for sure.
Well, that's the nature of college football coaches and coaches in general. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to stir anything up. They want to get into town, make a bunch of cliches, say all the right things, and then leave town and get back to coaching. And the media would like something to happen, somebody to say something that's a little bit funny, a little controversial. Maybe somebody gets called out, something like that. So was there anything to read into what Lincoln Riley had to say on Monday?
I would say some of the more compelling points of when he spoke up on stage. He was, of course, he was asked about the Kyler Murray quarterback situation, but for a lot of people it seems like a foregone conclusion that Kyler Murray will be the starter, to replace the void that Baker Mayfield has left. But he pretty quickly dismissed that. He's really asserting that there's still a quarterback competition between him and Austin Kendall, and he'd probably go as far as saying even Tanner Schaefer and Tanner Mordecai, but those guys are. I would not expect him to be the day one starter, but so yeah, he definitely wants to keep reiterating that, which is normal. It has to be expected. He's a coach, and another thing, he was pointing out some of the leaders because all four of the team captains from last year have moved on. So he did mention some names that are guys that have been stepping up since the season ended throughout spring, winter and spring, and over the summer. So that was pretty interesting, especially some defensive guys, because that was a big talking point about Oklahoma football was that defense last year, so or lack thereof.
Yeah, so Austin Kendall, looking at his page on 247 right now, came in as a top flight pro style quarterback, one of the top 10 in the nation, one of the top 10 prospects out of the state of North Carolina. Threw 22 passes last year, completed 16, obviously in mop-up duty. So what's his skill set compared to Kyler Murray's? Obviously, Murray's at a different level when it comes to just sheer athleticism and dynamic play. But how would you compare those two guys?
Yeah, I would say they really do. They really are about as opposite as you can get as far as their strengths. Yeah, Kyler Murray, he's known as a guy that he's one of the fastest guys on the team, if not the fastest. Him and Marquise Brown are right up there, but so that's unique for the quarterback position to be a guy that has that kind of those kind of wheels. But with Austin Kendall, he's definitely no statue in the pocket. He can. He's probably not as mobile or shifty as a Baker Mayfield, but he can definitely he definitely uses his legs to kind of improve his passing and to extend plays. But yeah, so another thing about the quarterback situation, Austin Kendall didn't play in last. He redshirted last year, but he he was the backup his true freshman year, so now he's a redshirt sophomore. Yeah, it was kind of an interesting deal, just because the quarterback depth in 2016 was really bad. So it was Baker Mayfield and then a true freshman. Like it was not very great. So if Baker Mayfield had gone down, it wasn't looking good. So yeah, he Austin Kendall, he looked really good in the spring game. Um, I honestly, if I were just basing it on the spring game, which I know that's not really, it's just a glorified scrimmage, but he probably looked a little better than Kyler Murray, I would say, passing the ball. But Kyler's got enough tape on him. I feel comfortable with him passing, being the starting quarterback and passing the ball. But yeah, as far as the rest of the game, what he brings to the offense, nobody else in the quarterback room brings what Kyler brings as far as what he does on the ground. And that's going to be something that I'm really interested in seeing is the rushing offense for this team, because not only are the running backs loaded again, but then if you add the element of the running quarterback like Kyler Murray, some really, really big numbers could come up this year for Oklahoma on the ground.
Yeah, Seth, let's stop right there, because Rodney Anderson was a guy that was one of the premier players in college football over the last 7 or 8 games last year. Only got, at one point I counted the number of attempts he had for the first 4 or 5 games. It was like 18 or 20. And then they finally found him and he just exploded. And then if you prorate what he was able to accomplish down the stretch to a full season, he's a Heisman candidate. He's like a 2,500-yard back, total back, not in terms of rushing, but rushing and receiving, because he can do it all. Had a huge game in the receiving category against TCU with a couple touchdowns and over 100 yards receiving there. I guess on one hand, I'm thinking he's going to explode and have an even bigger year because he's obviously the focal point of the offense from day one. There are other reasons for me to believe maybe not, because Dmitiri Flowers was one of the best blocking backs in the nation. He's gone. And there's going to be more focus on Rodney Anderson, and he's not going to surprise anyone. And but at the same time, they're going to have to rely on him more with no Baker Mayfield, and probably running the ball a little bit more coming up here in 2018.
Yeah, you said it. Yeah, the numbers that Rodney Anderson started to put up, I think he started to really break out probably around the Texas game. That's what he would say too. He was at Big 12 Media Days. He was one of the OU player representatives. And yeah, the Texas game, and then the Kansas State game right after that, the week after that, is where he really just he took control of the starting job for that. So yeah, some of the numbers he was putting up, it was just absurd. Yeah, both rushing and receiving. So yeah, I would expect him to continue it. I don't know if he'll take it even to another level. I'm sure just because he will be like the kind of the day one starter. His earlier like first half of the season numbers will definitely be better compared to last year's. But yeah, then it's a great thing to have a guy like Trey Sermon, who's his backup, who was a true freshman last year, but who played a ton, had a big game against Ohio State in just his second game of his career, and then that's a good point that you mentioned also, that Dmitiri Flowers is gone, because personally I think his loss might be even greater or harder to replace than Baker Mayfield. It just with who might replace him, which I don't even know if there is a guy that can replace him on the roster right now.
There's people all over the place, Seth, going say, time out. Whoa, what did he just say? Like, I was giving all sorts of good pub to Dmitiri Flowers and trying to outline a guy that doesn't get a whole lot of play, because the blocking fullback and the blocking back doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but you're going to elevate him possibly to being missed as much as Baker.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any team ever had an answer for him all season long. I mean, even a guy like Mark Andrews, there was games here and there that he didn't really have as much of an impact. But with Dmitiri Flowers, it just seemed like Lincoln Riley knew exactly how to always get him open, and then obviously Baker would make that connection with him. But I don't think there's going to be as much of a drop off from the quarterback position as there is the fullback position. Yes, I know the quarterback position overall is definitely more important and is going to play a bigger part in how the offense looks. But I think whoever comes in for the next fullback spot has some really big shoes to fill with Dmitiri Flowers. And the two guys that are probably the prime candidates right now. There's a redshirt senior and Carson Meyer, he's more of a blocking H-back. He's definitely he's proven in that area. And then a redshirt freshman, Jeremiah Hall, who's more in the mold of Flowers, but it'll be his first year playing, so that there's a lot to learn. The learning curve will be pretty steep.
Yeah, along the offensive line, you lose one of the best in the business, but you should be just as good. Maybe you had one of the best lines up front in the nation last year.
Yeah, I thought it was a shame that they weren't even a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. It's a pretty new award, but it's given to the nation's best offensive line as a unit. And yeah, I found it pretty shocking that they weren't even listed as the top three, because I thought they might have won it. I would have put my money on that if I was a betting man. But yeah, you lose Orlando Brown, who he was pretty sure he was a consensus All-American, or unanimous maybe even. But yeah, he did so much for the offensive line for the years that he was holding down that left spot, the blind spot, and the blind side. And another big, I would say, Eric Wren, the center, he did pretty well. He basically started for 2 years. He came in kind of a couple games into the 2016 season, but yeah, he did pretty well too. I would say his backup though, Creed Humphrey, will be a redshirt freshman this year. He's been talked about as one of the most powerful dudes on the team. Just overall, just even as a true freshman, they were saying he was one of the stronger guys on the team, period. So I feel pretty comfortable about that. But they will be moving former right tackle Bobby Evans over to the left side to account for the loss that Orlando Brown is leaving. So it'll be interesting. I would say the offensive line, it's probably going to perform about the same level. I don't expect there to be a big change, really. And also, I would be surprised if they do a lot better, but if they don't do as well, I don't think it'll be as big of a difference.
Time to talk Oklahoma football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe, like, and comment as we bring you the best content in college football online with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. Seth Oliveras, for the first time, joining us from Crimson and Cream Machine. We've had a number of guys, Seth, from your SB Nation platform right there, and we welcome you for the first time. That's great that you can join us. So we appreciate you spending some time with us. This offense, I've heard the big if being if Kyler Murray can somehow come close to duplicating, I wouldn't think can in any way be expected to be the passer from a polished standpoint as Baker Mayfield, but the dynamic playmaking ability, Mayfield was great in that department as well, but this guy just a different type of athlete, different level of athlete, could elevate this offense if he makes the right decisions, shows the efficiency with the explosion combined, that this offense could be the best that Oklahoma's had since that 2008 edition.
Yeah, that would be something right there, because yeah, that offense, and I would guess the 2017 offense would be like the kind of regarded now as the top two. It's really hard with Baker Mayfield. In 3 years, he had three really good offenses. The 2015, he had Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon and Sterling Shepard, and then the next year he had D.D. Westbrook, who was a fellow Heisman finalist, and then Biletnikoff winner. And then last year, of course, just the numbers were just gaudy all over the place. But yeah, with Kyler Murray, it's going to be. I think it's going to be really fun for a lot of Sooner fans, because even though we've seen him in mop-up duty here and there, and he's been on. This will be his third season on campus. He had to sit out the first one, then he was back up last year. There's still like this unknown, and it's like an excitement still. It's like an unknown, but then we also, Oklahoma fans expect not really much of a difference as far as numbers, maybe just the way those numbers are accumulated.
All right, Seth, let's get to the defense.
Okay.
All be fun and games and positive talk and paradise and unicorns. straight across the board. So we're going to move to the defense. And I think the defense ranked like 70th, 75th in the nation last year. Now, do I think that this defense was the 75th best defense in the country? No. Those metrics obviously play directly into your opponents as well. And they faced the likes of Georgia, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, TCU on down the line. West Virginia minus Will Grier, if I remember correctly, though.
True.
And,
That's
of course,
true.
Ohio State early in the season. But still not a championship level defense, not the likes that Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State trot out there that you know are the best 5 defenses in the country, something like that, that you would expect out of the best team in a college football playoff contender out of the Big 12. But that's the key phrase and term in the phrase Big 12, out of the Big 12. So if they can get to better defense, I would say that this was probably one of the top 40 defenses in the country, 45 defenses in the country, if you take into consideration the level of play that they had to play against on the offensive side of the ball. But how do they get better? Will they get better? Who needs to step up?
Yeah, defense. It's and it, you know, people in Oklahoma, that conversation definitely starts with the coordinator. But I thought what was interesting at Big 12 Media Days when Lincoln Riley spoke, and I mean this actually might have been the most interesting thing he said. But he said the way that Oklahoma is going to improve on defense is through recruiting. It's going to start with recruiting, and I haven't really seen it yet, but at first some people might think that that's kind of throwing the current players under the bus a little bit, saying we need to get better guys, better than what we, but I don't think that's necessarily like he obviously didn't mean it in any way maliciously, but it is true that Oklahoma needs those guys, like, because like you said, those the teams like Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, they're recruiting 5 and 4-star guys consistently, just reloading on the defensive side specifically. So it does start there, and then it goes to recruiting, then it goes to coaching and developing and schemes. And I think before media days, I wasn't that confident about the outlook on the defense. But after speaking with specifically Kenneth Murray, the starting Mike linebacker, he gave me, I don't know if it was just him, he convinced me basically, though. He was kind of stating how personally he took it, all the criticism, the negative discussion about the Oklahoma defense. He's really kind of put it on himself and taken ownership of it. And he's stated that he watched the Georgia game 128 times since it's ended, and he's really focused on not only improving his game, but he wants to make sure that he can conduct the defense the way a middle linebacker should to the highest level. So I think coming away from that, I'm a little more confident. I still need to wait and see. And they're not returning a ton of guys on defense. There's a lot of guys with some starting experience, but they did lose Obinaya Okoronkwo, who's now with the Los Angeles Rams, and he was probably the best defensive player last year, and then a couple guys in the secondary as well, which the secondary is probably the weak point of the defense. So we'll see.
Yeah, so when you look at the Big 12, what I find interesting is I have heard more about West Virginia because Will Grier's back, and I understand that, and I understand that he is the most known commodity at quarterback in a good way than anybody has in the conference. I get that. I also get that West Virginia's got a ton of players in prolific offense, and we know what the issues are on defense. But we've heard West Virginia just talked up the entire offseason as kind of the chic pick, the under-the-radar pick, which after it gets talked about enough, they no longer are the under-the-radar pick for a lot of people out of the Big 12. But when it came down to it, when the media decided, and I don't know if you were able to cast your ballot as well, Seth, but when the media decided who the favorite was in the Big 12, it was overwhelmingly Oklahoma. 45, 48 votes, whatever the total was, something like that, and nobody else had more than 3.
Yeah, it's kind of let's talk about contenders that'll challenge and possibly even take the Big 12 for the first time since 2014 when it wasn't Oklahoma. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I don't think people are confident enough yet to, at least the media members weren't confident enough yet to pick anybody else over Oklahoma, at least not overwhelmingly. So I do believe West Virginia was second, right, in the preseason. They're picked second, but obviously behind Oklahoma, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I
But
think there's a tier there with West Virginia and Texas that most people believe that they have the best shot at challenging. Texas, I would think, would have a really good shot if they could have kept that defense together. Now, I know that they've recruited at the level that they should be able to replace those guys. Actually, the one recruiting class is exceptional. Obviously, those guys are all true freshmen right now. But even the past few classes, even though the program took a tumble and started winning 5 games out of nowhere after Mac Brown left, the recruiting never really suffered to a large degree. There were still good recruiting classes, maybe not to Texas standards, but top 15 to 20 classes. Now, if Tom Herman and his defensive staff, most notably, can coach them up, then they replace Malik Jefferson and Poona Ford and Deshaun Elliott. But, man, that was just a wrecking crew that gave Baker Mayfield about as many fits as anybody else did, except for maybe Georgia in the second half. Last season. They were really good. They took Mason Rudolph to overtime at Oklahoma State, only gave up 10 points in regulation. So if they brought that crew back, I would think that it would be a great matchup for the Big 12 title. But considering trying to replace those guys with a young defense that's going to be extremely talented, but young, and then still issues at quarterback and trying to figure out who can lead this team consistently, I still think Oklahoma, top to bottom, just has the most trustworthy roster, coaching staff, and program right now.
yeah, I totally agree. I think the key word you said there is trustworthy. Yeah, because while West Virginia returns Will Grier, who's definitely the most proven quarterback in the league right now. We've seen West Virginia in the Big 12 for this will be their 7th year, I believe, since 2012, and it's they have rarely exceeded expectations, and sometimes they don't even meet expectations. So it's almost like people want to wait and see them actually do it. Whereas Oklahoma, they'll lose players, kind of all-time great players, or all decade kind of players, and then they're still right back at the top the very next year. It almost doesn't even matter. So yeah, it's looking good for Oklahoma's chances, even though the quarterback situation, we've got to wait and see how effective either one of those guys is. But yeah, it's until Oklahoma gives other people a reason to believe they can actually win it, that I think they're still the safe bet.
Yeah, it's great to throw out a passing offense that's that prolific. You're dangerous and you're fun to watch, but you got to be able to throw out a couple stops on defense. You got to be able to make, and some of the teams that have been successful in college football that didn't have the great roster top to bottom. I think of an Oregon or somebody like that in the past. They at least had a defense out there that would be capable enough of slowing down an offense, making them have to drive the length of the field, and then usually the offense misfires on a couple passes, so you get them off the field, or you have an explosive player or two to the level of which you can create maybe the 2 turnovers in the game, that even though you gave up 38 points, you created 2 turnovers in a short field for the offense and you win that game 45-38. But Dana Holgorsen, basically, I got to think that if he doesn't put up a strong season this year, that they got to think about maybe going in another direction. I'm looking at since West Virginia entered the Big 12 and had to take on a higher level of football from what was the Big East, 7-6, 4-8, 7-6, 8-5, 10-3, but then they got blasted by Miami in the bowl game, and 7-6 last year. So West Virginia actually doesn't get regarded very highly, but their football history is pretty strong, and they're used to winning bowl games and getting to postseason play and finishing in the top 25 most of the time. And Dana Holgorsen has only been slightly better than 500.
Yeah, those numbers really kind of put it in perspective. What season was that? That 10-win season, was that
So that was
2016?
yeah, that was 2 years ago. They started off really strong. I don't have the game by game, but they
Oh,
went
okay.
10-2, and then they played Miami, who was only 8-4 out of the
I remember
ACC,
that
and they got
game.
whipped in the Russell Athletic Bowl. And
Ooh.
yeah, that was just 2 years ago in 2016.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to have seen that game last year against Oklahoma with Will Greer also, because yeah, he was his finger, really gross injury to his finger the week before against, I believe, Texas. So it'll be interesting to see this time around, and that's the if the media proves to be right as far as the top two teams, that'll be really interesting because Oklahoma and West Virginia play in the final week before the Big 12 championship. So if they end up after that game as the top two teams still, then they're going to play again the very next week. And so it'll, I think the Big 12 is really trying to avoid that. But if, if it shakes out the way the media predicted, then that's what's going to happen.
So, Seth, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up because this bothers me. I love the traditional rivalries, and I think that they should be played when they should be played. So it's always been Bedlam, Oklahoma State finishing out the year in the Big 12. Now, once the Big 12 went to a championship game again, but they didn't have the divisions, yes, you run the risk of a repeat game. So that first year that they did it, which was just last season, I thought that they were making a scheduling move to say, we pretty much know Oklahoma is the best team in the conference, and it looks like Oklahoma State's the second best team in the conference. It did it preseason. Most of us had them playing in the Big 12 championship game. It didn't happen, but they avoided that matchup for the first time in forever. They didn't schedule the Cowboys and the Sooners the last game of the season. So I thought that was maybe a temporary thing, even though I thought it was kind of quirky and stupid to be that obvious. But now they come back this year, and I guess this Oklahoma-West Virginia game is going to be the season finale. I don't really get the connection there between the two programs for them to be playing the last game and to discard what's been a historic rivalry, the rivalry in the conference, Oklahoma State, other than OU and Texas.
Right. Yeah, I don't understand the scheduling philosophy behind that. Yeah, it was pretty obvious last year why it was the first year, and yeah, like you said, forever that Bedlam wasn't the final weekend of the regular season. So, and then of course it didn't play out that. I think the TCU game followed the Oklahoma State game for Oklahoma. So that rematch happened with, when the first game was more fresh than the Oklahoma State game. So yeah, I'm not sure, and I think it hasn't been talked about as much at this season as it has been in a couple past seasons, but I think the Big 12 at some point is going to need to expand, and then that way they can introduce divisions like they used to with the Big 12 North and the Big 12 South, because I mean, and even then, there's obviously still a little chance that there could be a rematch, but the way it is now, it I don't know, it doesn't seem like the right way to go, but that's what we've got.
So, Seth, you may be able to answer this. Is this a Big 12 decision, or is this somebody else making a decision that they can't go into division play?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because, yeah, you would still have the rematch. So let's say they still play 9 games, but any teams can rematch in conference championship games. It just
Right.
doesn't happen as often, but you would be guaranteeing a rematch, but that's what they already have. So at least you have division champions. At least you would be able to say this team played everyone in this division and whatever games they played in the cross division play, and they won the division. And I guess if they're all playing each other, it doesn't matter what the divisions are. But what I would hate to see, and it's going to happen if they do this for too long, what's going to happen is a team goes undefeated, 9-0 in the conference, and somebody else is, let's say, 6, and let's say there's a log jam at 6-3 for second place, or even 7-2, and that team wins the conference championship game. And so it's like, well, it's just kind of an extension of the regular season because everybody plays everybody. So you just played them again and beat them, but you have a worse record and you split 2 games but you're the conference champion just because we said this is the conference championship game. It's just, hopefully it's avoided, or for people like me that kind of find a little bit of amusement in those kind of situations, maybe it's not.
Yeah, no, it just makes me think of it's, I don't know if it's the official slogan of the Big 12, but there was some talk Big 12 media days, the hardest path to the college football playoff.
Why
There
do you
you go.
tell people that?
I don't
So
know.
I the way you just said it, I'm interpreting it differently. So I guess I get it. So I give all credit, not necessarily to the Big 12 because they didn't want it this way. It happened because teams left the conference and put them in a situation where everyone plays everyone. But it's the purest championship of all the conference championships. If nothing else, nobody misses anyone. You take especially the ACC and the SEC because they play just a 9 or an 8 game season with a 14 team conference. You're missing 5 opponents. Your record, your schedule can be noticeably different than somebody else's schedule that plays in another division. Especially, you may only have 3 games that intersect, and you're missing 5 teams in your conference. I just think that's the leagues have expanded too much when you're missing 5 teams and you're only seeing a team in the other division every 6 years because you're only playing 2 in the other division. If anything, again, I'm not going to credit the Big 12 because they didn't want it to happen this way. They were forced into this situation, but it's the purest championship.
Yeah, yeah, and a great example of a team kind of getting lucky and not having to play some of their top conference mates. Wisconsin last year, I would say, without looking at their schedule, but I just know that I remember the discussion all season was, well, there's nobody on Wisconsin's schedule, so they're just going to have to wait until the Big Ten championship game, and whoever that is, then they're going to have to beat them.
No Ohio State, no Michigan State, no Penn State on their schedule.
Yeah, so it's they that's pretty good schedule for to try to make a run at the college football playoff when you
Exactly.
can
Oklahoma, here's your schedule this year. You don't have to play Oklahoma State, TCU, and West Virginia.
Yeah, exactly. How can you imagine that? So, yeah, they're kind of the way they're using the hardest path to the college football playoff thing. I understand it too, but it almost, I wish I could have been in that meeting room when they came up with that, because just to point out that's not how everybody else is going to look at it, because you don't want to have necessarily the hardest path. Maybe if your team gets there, then you can feel like you earned it more than anybody else. But if your goal is to get there, you probably like to help yourself out a little bit.
Seth, we can name some schools that have high standards, but I can only name maybe 5 where if they don't make the college football playoff since this started back in 2014, it's a failure. I hate to state it that way because I don't think it's necessarily a failure. So take Ohio State last year, or take Oklahoma, the couple times that they were left out when they won the conference. I hate to say that's a failure, but it's deemed because of the expectations of the program and the fan base that you played Oklahoma to win the Big 12. And then now that it's set up this way with the 4 teams playing out of 5 conferences, well, you better get selected, or you don't want to be that team that was Ohio State and USC last year and has been Oklahoma in the past and TCU and Baylor, where you get left out and have to say, well, we won our conference, but we got left out. So that's the expectation, and everything else is bust.
Yeah, and yeah, one of those teams is definitely Oklahoma, especially after making it now to the last 3 years. But even before then, when the CFP began and people knew what they were, getting themselves into, Oklahoma expected to be one of those teams, kind of year in, year out, like at least in contention. So yeah, and there's talks about like maybe expanding it, but I think we're headed that way. But if it were up to me, I wouldn't want it to expand. I like the 4 team because I think it's just the right amount where it doesn't diminish. We haven't seen any diminishing of the regular season at all. If anything, it's made it even more exciting, just following along throughout the year. And then there's still one of the best things about the sport is are the debates and the people making their cases for their teams, and you wouldn't really have that if it was like an 18 playoff or five, the Power Five champs all were automatically in, and then I guess there would be a debate about some at larges or stuff like that, but that's not the same. And I just think it would kind of diminish the product of the playoff. So, but yeah, Oklahoma is definitely one of those teams, for better or worse, that expects to get there every year. I would say fans, if you're going to rank seasons as far as expectations, wouldn't Oklahoma fans aren't expecting as much from this season as last season, just because last season you have Baker Mayfield in his senior year, all the weapons he had around him. Well, except running back was a question mark going into the season, but it turned out to be just fine. But yeah, with a new quarterback, I think fans are going to be a little less. But let's say Oklahoma starts out the season 4-5-0, then you better get to the playoff, or people aren't going to be very happy.
Seth, you've been a great guest, but I can't disagree with you more. But we're not going to have a college football playoff debate. I would go to 8 teams in a heartbeat. I would have done that about 50 years ago. But because I think everybody should be represented, meaning every conference needs to be represented. Anyway, certainly there is some credibility to what you have to say, and a lot of people are on board with you in regards to being able to look at every season since it started in 2014 and feel comfortable that, yeah, those are generally the 4 best teams, and let's go with them. And the one team that won a conference maybe didn't quite have the resume of the other 4, and so I see that, but I like to have all the conferences represented, and I could also make a case for the teams every year that get left out as having just as good a resume as some of the teams that were in, but that's a discussion for another time. Seth, we appreciate you setting us up on Oklahoma football for 2018. If you've got some time in your schedule, hopefully we can have you back sometime during fall camp before 2018 kicks off.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's been a blast. I love talking football. I can talk all day. So,
Seth Oliveris, Crimson and Cream Machine, we appreciate it. I want to let everybody know that's on the live stream right now. Didn't have necessarily any decent chats there to pass along to Seth, but want to let everyone know that at 5 o'clock we've got Boston College Talk, 6 o'clock Texas, and at 8 o'clock Miami. So join me right back here. Seth, we'll see you soon.
All right. See you there.